Thanks for joining me again with Teaching Through the Bible as we continue looking through the book of Numbers. So we've already looked through that first section. The first generation prepares. They're preparing to enter the promised land. They're right on the border there, and they're preparing to enter, but they don't do that. And here's why. We see that right here. What do they do instead? They rebel, 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 they rebel. We don't get through all of that today, but we'll get a start on it. But that is going to be this whole next section, chapters 11 through 25. That's what we're going to see. That's going to be a large part of it. Also, we will see how God responds. We see the various ways that he responds and judges them for their rebellion. A lot of this rebellion is complaining against him, doubting him, all that sort of thing. And we'll see as we go through this book all the different ways they do that. Everyone gets their turn in doing this, and everyone in some form or another gets judged. But we'll begin with the first ones today, chapter 11. And the people complained in the hearing of Yahweh about their misfortunes. Which I do wonder, what is the misfortune here, as they have been provided for in the wilderness? Before that, God saved them from brutal slavery in Egypt. He's bringing them to this promised land, and here they are complaining. He's miraculously provided water, miraculously provided food. It says elsewhere that their clothes didn't wear out throughout the time in the wilderness. He's miraculously providing so much, and somehow they have misfortunes. I guess the grass is always greener on the other side. At least they think so. Because it says, and when Yahweh heard it, his anger was kindled. And the fire of Yahweh burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. And so this is kind of a warning, right? The edges of the camp. Maybe it's right outside the bounds of the camp. Maybe it's some of their, stuff on the edge. Maybe whoever was camped on the far end, their tent maybe it caught on fire too. I don't know exactly where that boundary is, but around the edges, there's fire. And they recognized the work of God. Then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to Yahweh, and the fire died down. So the name of that place was called Tavera, because the fire of Yahweh burned among them. So he's got this warning. They start complaining. He says, guys, let's not go down this path. Don't complain, right? And if any of y'all have kids, if any of y'all are kids and have younger siblings, maybe you've seen this, where you say to, you say to the young kids, say, hey, don't whine about this. And you try to redirect that. And then what happens? Sometimes it doesn't matter what you say. Now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and the people of Israel also wept again, and said, oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at. So nothing at all but this miraculous food that God has somehow provided for everyone for these months, and actually at this point over a year. It's amazing. So the rabble here, a lot of people think this is actually referring to the words more like this collection. So if this is a collection of people, perhaps this is the people who came with the Israelites, not ethnic Israelites, but the people who came along with them out of Egypt, because there was another group that kind of joined them, people from here and there, so, a collection. Some of these may have been like Egyptians. There was indication of that. Back in Leviticus, we saw that there was someone who, his mother was an Israelite and his father was an Egyptian, I believe is what it was. And so you have these other people, and maybe they actually did have this stuff. Maybe they weren't slaves, the people who initially complained, the rabble, that, as it says, maybe they weren't slaves. But everyone who's like joining in on this with them, all the Israelites, it says the Israelites, the people of Israel, also wept again. So this is the people who were enslaved, and they're thinking, yeah, remember when we got to eat cucumbers for free? Like, wow, it's crazy. Just they just had this warning, and then they just go back to it and they complain again, and what happens? Now there's a plague. This plague is interesting because what happens is God does send them, be careful what you ask for, because God sends them meat. He sends them all this quail, and he's done this before. We saw this back in Exodus, but now he sends so much that it is like 3 feet high off the ground, all this quail everywhere. And the person who gathered least, chapter 11, verse 32, those who gathered least gathered 10 homers, which is like, you got this 2-liter container right here. It's about 1,000 of these. So that's a lot. So they're overloaded. And it says that even as they're eating it, though, this plague strikes them as they are eating this food, and God judges them with this plague that's associated with all the quail. So you've seen here already now two things where they've rebelled, right? And so, but is that enough? Nope, they want more. So they've had these 2 plagues, but then we get Miriam and Aaron. So now it's not just generically, some people were grumbling and complaining. It's not just the people who came along with the Israelites who were complaining and kind of getting the rest of the Israelites in on this. Now it's Moses' own family, and actually in leadership as well. Both of these were leaders in this nation in some form or another, and his family has turned against him as well. And we see that with Jesus. Jesus' own family does not believe his ministry. Jesus' own family turns against him, and they think he's crazy. It says that in the New Testament. They come to try to get him, to bring him back home because they think he's gone nuts. Well, but Miriam and Aaron, it's not the exact same thing. They're not saying he's crazy. They're just saying, hey, we think we're just as high on the totem pole as Moses is. Moses wasn't someone who was lording it over everyone, how he was in charge. And yet Miriam and Aaron use something else to kind of point out something and then try to segue that into we're special as Moses. We get just as much authority as Moses, or we should. But God says, no, not so fast. They are rebelling against Moses, God's chosen prophet, and so they're rebelling against God. And what happens? Leprosy. Miriam gets leprosy. Now, here, you may look and notice, wait a second, but Aaron didn't get leprosy, but Aaron was doing the same thing as Miriam, right? They both were rebelling, and then only Miriam gets leprosy. Now, this is actually something that's not for Aaron. It's not protecting Aaron. It's not giving preference to Aaron in any way. It's being merciful to the nation of Israel, because don't forget, who is Aaron? What is his job? He's the high priest. Whenever this was, the high priest had responsibilities that he was supposed to do in order to be the mediator between God and the Israelites. And if you don't have that guy there, the high priest, then you have this disconnect. And you can't have these sacrifices done properly because you have no high priest. Because if he has leprosy, if he's unclean, he is not allowed to give sacrifices. He's not allowed to do his job. He has to remain outside the camp for a designated amount of time. We see in Leviticus, and I can link that below, about what they do when they have skin diseases. Well, so here, when they don't, we see that Aaron doesn't get the disease. It's God actually being merciful toward the whole nation of Israel. Miriam does get the disease. And then we see God shows, actually, no, Moses is the guy. Because then Moses is able to pray, to intercede on Miriam's behalf, and she is healed. She still has to follow the process we see back in Leviticus on the cleanliness laws, and she has to remain outside the camp for 7 days. She still has to follow that whole process, but she does get healed. And so Moses is vindicated. All of this has happened. And throughout this, Moses, he may be humble, but he doesn't have infinite patience. He actually has said to God, hey, if it's going to be like this with these bunch of babies, just kill me now. He says that it's like dealing with a bunch of whining babies. And he literally does say, just kill me. Like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. Now, God provides others to help him bear the load. We see that with these elders that are appointed for people in churches that use elders. This is one of those passages. There's this that we had back in Exodus 18. These are the foundation, or some of it, where the New Testament then creates this position of elder. It's following through with what we already see in the Old Testament. So if you are at a church that has elders, here's part of why. You have this precedent in the Old Testament, and then it's got this stamp of approval in the New Testament that we're continuing to do this. So with this, though, he's got that help that God gives him, but still he's got all these complaints, and we're just only beginning. We're only just at the beginning of it, because after that, then we got the spies that go to the promised land. So he sends people to the promised land and says, hey, go check it out. Let us know what it's like. They come back and they say, this is chapter 13. They investigate it and they come back and they say, actually, this place is pretty great, but it's terrible because there's no way we're going to be able to defeat the people that are there. And so they don't trust God. They say, yeah, the land is great. The land is what God says it was, but also there's all these people there that we'll have to deal with. But of course, God already knew this. God's actually bringing them there to judge those people for their evil, the people in the land, judging those people for their evil. We saw this back in Genesis, that God said this was going to happen. And so instead of trusting God, that he knows what he's talking about, they all say, we can't do it. Back out. We want to go to Egypt. You know what? It would have been better if we died in the desert than if we had to go here. They literally say that it would be better to die in the desert. So God says, all right, if that's what you want, because that's the punishment. Their judgment is, all right, you all who followed these spies, you all who, the whole nation of Israel, they said, yeah, we're doing what these spies said. We want to go back. Because of that, because of their complaining, because of the rebellion, God says, well, then you won't go into the promised land. You will die in the desert over the next 40 years. 40 years, they're going to wander around in the desert until they're all dead. Everyone that was in that first census we just talked about. So chapter 1 had the census. Everyone 20 years and up, you're all dying sometime in the next 40 years as you wander around in the wilderness. And your kids, when they grow up, they are going to be the ones to go into the promised land and follow my instructions. That's what God's telling them. To which the people say, oh, never mind. Actually, you know what? No, let's go ahead. We're going to go. We're going to go actually do what you said the first time. Actually, we're not going to wander in the desert like you now have told us to do. We're going to do the thing you said earlier, and we're going to go attack. This is they're just can't have it either way, right? They're just unhappy whatever God tells them, because now that God said, okay, you're not going to go there, you're going to go here, and they're like, no, we are going to go there now, actually. And so Moses warns them, don't do this. You're rebelling against God. What do? They still go, and they get defeated. They get defeated, and it says all the way to Hormah. So, which that is the Hebrew word that's related to just total destruction. So it's a place, it's a location, but it's also symbolic there that happens. And so you have this judgment, and it says this at the end of chapter 14, verse 45. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down and defeated them and pursued them even to Hormah. So they're defeated. They're going to have to stay in the desert. And these spies, what happens to them? These are the ones who got the people to start disobeying God again, to continue this rebellious theme we've got going on. So chapter 14, verse 36, and the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing up a bad report about the land, the men who brought up a bad report of the land died by plague before Yahweh. Of those men who went to spy out the land, only Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive. Now, of those 12 spies, let's look at that, because there's one from each tribe, right? We always want to look at those lists. We want to see any significance in there. Levi's left out, makes sense, because they have a different job. And so it's these from the 12 tribes that were counted with the census. They go, and two of them, Joshua and Caleb, are the only two that say, no, let's stay faithful to God, let's follow him. And they're the only two who survive to get into the promised land because of that. Now here, Joshua, Caleb. Caleb represents Judah, and Joshua represents Ephraim. which is significant. Ephraim is part of Joseph. Remember, Joseph had two tribes that represent Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Judah is promised to be one from whom kings are going to come from. That's promised back at the end of Genesis. Ephraim is one who was said he was going to be a leader back in Genesis as well. At the end there, Jacob gives these prophecies and he gives these blessings. And those are two of the ones that are highlighted there. And so here we're seeing that those two people are the ones that were faithful. Everyone else was rebelling against God and saying, let's not do this. Then we also see something where people notice the Nephilim here. They ask questions about chapter 13, verse 33. And there you have these two spies saying, no, we can do this. And so the 10, they're trying to make their case. They're trying to argue, no, don't listen to those two guys. Listen to us. We can't do it. And the story gets bigger and bigger. No, it's so terrible, right? So it ends with chapter 13, verse 33. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. We seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Now, here, it sounds like they're saying they were giants, right? We were so small. Okay, so if someone's taller than you, they can be imposing, for sure. And so maybe that's what was the case. We know later on we have Goliath. He was 9 feet tall, though. He wasn't like 20, 30 feet tall. He wasn't some huge monstrosity or something. 9 feet is tall. It's taller than anyone I've ever seen, for sure. But we have people in the NBA who are like 7.5 feet tall. So you have a really large person that's intimidating, but it doesn't mean there's some other sort of being. But the last couple things we want to see in this section, chapters 11 through 14, is chapter 14, verse 11. Chapter 14, verse 11 says, And Yahweh said to Moses, How long will this people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me, in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? I will strike them with the pestilence, and disinherit them. And I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. Now, here, at the moment, Moses intercedes, and this doesn't directly happen right here. But this is pointing forward to something else, isn't it? Because they have rejected God, and he says, I'm going to disinherit them, and what does he say? Make a nation greater and mightier. Well, guess what? When Jesus comes, they are going to again reject God in human form. They're going to reject him, and he will disinherit that nation of Israel that's God's chosen people of the Old Testament, and instead he will make a new nation, right? And that is still God's chosen people, which now looks different in the New Testament era. It's not a nation of Israel. This new nation is actually people from all over the world. People of every tongue, tribe, and nation are this new group that's greater. And so that's something that kind of gets to point us forward to how things will be different in the New Testament. When you have the greater prophet, not Moses, the one who's greater, Jesus, who is God himself. Then we look at this rebellion, this whole pattern of rebellion. That's so easy just to say, like, what on earth? What are they thinking? They're crazy. I would never do that. But wouldn't you? Because they were chosen. They were God's people. They're chosen in the Old Testament. And we still have a chosen people of God in the New Testament. God has his people in the New Testament. It doesn't look the same. It's not a nation of like the nation of Israel. It's people around the world. We see this in the New Testament, how the whole world now gets this gospel message. But it's just like we saw in these verses in chapter 14, and talking about them being disinherited, but then him making this greater group from that. And that's the New Testament gospel right there. But us in the New Testament, we're the same people. We still rebel. We still make bad choices, make evil choices, and that's why we need Jesus. If we didn't do that, if we were all good to go, we wouldn't need Jesus. And so we have the same needs they do. We're stuck in the same position, and need Jesus just as much as them. And that's where we go into chapter 15, which reminds us of that, which we'll talk about in the next lesson. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.